Back in 1978, the local diner felt like a safe sanctuary. It smelled like toasted bread, but psychologists say the human brain does something dangerous when it craves comfort. It completely ignores deep shadows if the light is warm enough.
We label a familiar routine as safe, but that is exactly how psychological horror hides in. The most terrifying things don't scream. Instead, they sit perfectly still.
Tonight, we explore the crushing weight of human regret, a story of how an unspoken guilt can physically warp the world around it. Before we begin, ask yourself, are you remembering your own past accurately, or just the story that helps you sleep? This is the psychology of a haunting regret.
Back in the winter of 1978, I was working the late shift at Henderson's diner. It was a quiet place, just off Route 4, right on the edge of town. Most nights, it was just me, the smell of old coffee, and the hum of the neon sign outside. You get to know the regulars, their faces, their habits, the way they took their eggs. But there was one thing everyone knew, even if nobody really talked about it. Martha, she was the head waitress back then. She'd been there 30 years. A good woman, steady. But on my very first night, she pulled me aside by the pie case. She didn't smile, she just pointed to the back corner. "Evelyn," she told me, her voice real low, "if anyone comes in after midnight, you don't seat them in booth 6. You tell them it's closed. You tell them the table is broken. You tell them whatever you have to." At the time, I thought she was just being superstitious, an old woman with her eccentricities. So I smiled and I nodded. Looking back now, I wish I had taken her seriously. I really do. I was 22 then, just trying to save up enough money, for a down payment on a little place of my own. The diner was a comfort, honestly. It had these deep cherry red vinyl booths, the kind that made that loud, cracking sound when you sat down. During the day, it was warm, loud. Local truckers would come in, laughing, complaining about the ice on the roads. By the end of a shift, my hands always smelled like maple syrup and dish soap. It was a simple life, safe. Martha was like a mother to all of us. She'd bring in her knitting during the slow hours, usually between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. We'd sit at the counter, and she'd tell me about her grandkids. We'd just watch the snow fall against those big front windows. Booth 6 was just like the others, right by the jukebox under a faded print of a Norman Rockwell painting. During the day, families sat there. Kids spilled milkshakes on the formica. There was nothing strange about it, not during the day anyway. I got used to the routine, the comfort of it. You just get this feeling that nothing bad could ever really happen in a place that smells like toasted bread. But then, the sun would go down. Around 11, the truckers left. The loud laughter faded away, and it was replaced by this heavy, rhythmic thumping from the old refrigerator in the back. The yellow fluorescent lights overhead. They seemed to buzz a little louder once the room emptied out. I remember standing by the coffee maker one night, just wiping down the counter. It was late, maybe 11:30. The diner was completely empty, but my eyes kept drifting toward the back corner, toward booth 6. At first, I ignored it. It was just an empty table in the dark part of the room where the streetlights outside didn't quite reach. But the silence over there, it felt different, heavy, like the air was thicker in that specific spot. Martha was near the cash register, counting the evening bills. Usually she chatted while she worked, humming some old tune under her breath. But that night, she stopped. Her fingers just hovered over the paper money. She didn't look up, but her jaw tightened, and she glanced toward the front door. "Cold out there tonight, Evie," she said. Her voice was much quieter than usual. "Yeah," I murmured, putting the rag down. "The radio said the freeze is getting worse." She didn't answer. She just slowly closed the register, the metal drawer sliding shut with a soft, dull click. She didn't slam it like she normally did. She did it gently, as if she was trying not to wake someone up. I still remember the way she looked at the clock right after that. It was 11:45. But I didn't understand what it meant yet. It happened in mid-January. Martha had gone home early that night. Her hip, it always bothered her when the cold got really deep like that. So it was just me and Ben, the short-order cook, working in the back. The clock over the greasy grill said 12:15. The roads were just terrible. A real heavy freeze. Nobody was out, so when the little bell above the front door chimed, I remember it actually made me jump a bit. A man walked in. He wore this long, gray wool coat. It looked damp at the shoulders, like he'd been walking through the sleet. He didn't even look my way. He just walked straight past the counter and sat right down in booth 6. I froze for a second. I honestly did. My mind went straight back to Martha's face by the pie case, the way she held my arm. But then I looked closer at him. He just looked so tired, older. His hands were shaking a little as he pulled them out of his pockets like he'd been out in that bitter wind for way too long. I told myself I was just being silly. You know how you do when you're tired? You make up stories. Martha wasn't even there and it was freezing outside. What was I supposed to do? Make an old man move to a different seat just because of some old diner rumor? It didn't make sense. It felt cruel. So I grabbed a menu and a fresh glass of water. "Evening," I said, walking over and pouring him a cup of decaf. He didn't look up at me, not at first. He just stared right at the middle of the Formica table. "Thank you, Truth," he whispered. I stopped pouring. The diner was so quiet, but I still thought I must have misheard him. "Excuse me," I asked. He paused, then he slowly looked up at me, and he smiled. It was a perfectly normal, tired smile, the kind you see every day. "Thank you, dear, just coffee." I let out this long breath. A sigh of relief, really, I figured. Well, I was just overthinking things. I was exhausted, my shift was almost over, and my mind was playing tricks. At first, it honestly didn't seem important. But as I walked back to the counter, I realized the steam from his coffee wasn't rising straight up like it usually does. But then, he came back the next night. Exactly at midnight. And honestly, the night after that, too. Every single time he walked right past me, went straight to the back and sat down in booth 6. He always wore that same gray coat, and he always ordered the exact same thing, just coffee. By the 4th night, things started to feel off. Ben was in the back, scraping down the hot grill with that heavy metal scraper. Usually that noise filled the whole diner. It was loud, familiar, comforting, but when I stood anywhere near booth 6, I couldn't hear the grill anymore. It was like the sound just couldn't reach that corner of the room. It was just quiet, too quiet. And then there was the smell. It didn't smell like fresh coffee or fried food over there. It smelled like old paper, like a box in a basement that hadn't been opened in years. Cold, damp. That was the part I couldn't explain. I started to notice he never actually drank the coffee, not even a sip. He'd just hold the heavy ceramic mug, both hands wrapped tight around it, just staring at the empty vinyl seat right across from him. One night, it must have been a Thursday, I went over to refill his cup, just trying to be normal, you know. As I poured the dark coffee, I happened to glance down at his hands. They weren't shaking from the winter cold anymore. They were perfectly still. Frozen, too still. And his eyes, he wasn't blinking, not once. He was just staring at that empty bench opposite him. His lips were moving just a little bit, like he was having a conversation, a very intense conversation, but there was absolutely no sound coming out of his mouth. I stopped pouring and stepped back. My heart was doing something strange in my chest, a sort of cold flutter. "Sir," I asked. My voice sounded thin in the quiet. He didn't move. He didn't even look up at me. But the air right there in the booth, it suddenly felt heavy, like the feeling you get right before a bad summer thunderstorm drops. I could actually feel the tiny hairs on my arms standing straight up. Something felt strange, deeply wrong. I could feel it right in my stomach, that heavy knot telling you to get away. It just wasn't right. I backed up slowly toward the kitchen, my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. When I looked back at the table, I noticed something that made my breath catch. The glass of water I had set down for him earlier was completely covered in a thick, white layer of frost. The next evening, I couldn't take it anymore. Before the late shift started, I found Martha in the break room. She was putting on her apron. "Martha," I said. My voice was smaller than I wanted it to be. "The man in the gray coat, he keeps sitting in booth 6. Martha stopped. She didn't drop her apron, but her hands just went limp. She looked at me for a long time. The clock on the wall was ticking. "You let him sit there," she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't think. "Evelyn," she interrupted softly. She sat down at the small break room table. She looked so old right then. "That man, his name is Thomas. He used to live down by the creek." She took a deep breath. "In the winter of 1968, 10 years ago, Thomas and his wife, Clara, were driving home from the cinema. It was late, past midnight. The roads were pure ice. Their car skidded. It went right off the bridge." I felt the room get a little colder. "Thomas survived," Martha whispered. "He crawled out of the water, but Clara, they didn't find her until the spring." I swallowed hard. That's terrible, Martha, but why does he come here?" Martha looked out the small window into the diner. "Before they went over the bridge, they'd stopped here. At Henderson's, they sat in booth 6. They had a fight, Evelyn, a silly, stupid argument about something that didn't matter. Clara wanted to stay and have another pie. Thomas wanted to leave because of the snow. He forced her into that car." She turned back to me. Her eyes were watery. "Thomas didn't start coming back here until 5 years ago, always in January, always after midnight. He sits there, and he repeats the argument, over and over, trying to change her mind, trying to get her to stay." I stared at her. "So, he's just a grieving man, he's lonely." "No, Evelyn," Martha said, her voice dropping to a whisper that made my skin prickle. "You don't understand. Thomas died in his sleep at the county hospital 6 years ago." The room went completely silent. "The man you're serving," Martha said, "isn't Thomas trying to change the past. It's whatever is left of that regret. And if you look too closely, if you stay too long at that table, it starts to take yours too." I finished my shift that night, but I didn't go anywhere near booth 6. Before the clock struck 12, I took a heavy plastic, reserved, sign and set it right in the middle of the table. When midnight came, I just stayed back behind the counter, gripping a dish towel. The little bell above the door didn't ring that night. The room stayed completely still, except for the low, steady hum of the pie case. But when I looked over at 12:15, the clean coffee mug I'd left sitting on the counter was just gone. It wasn't there anymore. My heart gave a heavy thump against my ribs. I looked across the dim room, and there was a faint reflection in the dark glass of the window right by booth 6. Just a shape, really. The shape of a long, gray coat sitting perfectly still in the shadow. I quit Henderson's the very following week. I didn't give a long speech or anything. I just told Martha I couldn't do the late hours anymore. I took a job at a small dry cleaner in the next town over. It paid a little bit less, but there were no night shifts and absolutely no booths, just bright lights and the smell of steam. Even now, 40 years later, I still think about that diner. Sometimes, when it's real late at night and the winter wind starts hitting the windows of my house, I find myself sitting up in bed, just staring into the dark hallway. I lie there thinking about Thomas, or whatever that entity was. I think about how powerful a single regret can be, the way a bad choice can just linger in a quiet corner, waiting long after the actual person is gone. Nobody noticed it at first, how much that winter changed me. I became quieter. I started holding on to the people I loved just a little bit tighter, never letting them leave the house angry. Because of some questions, they just don't have good answers. And honestly, maybe that's the part I couldn't explain, the thing that still bothers me the most when the house gets quiet. The thought of him still sitting there, in the dark, still trying to get her to stay. Looking back now, I realize some doors should never be opened, even if you're just trying to be kind. We all have things we wish we could take back, don't we? Words we shouldn't have said, decisions we make in a hurry when we are tired or angry, but most of the time, we have to carry them with us. We don't get to sit in the dark and replay them forever. We just have to move forward. Maybe that's the real warning Martha was trying to give me by that pie case. Don't let your regrets become the place you live. It's funny how a place can stay with you. I haven't been back to that town in decades. The diner might not even be there anymore. It might be a parking lot or a different store completely. But in my mind, those red vinyl seats are still there. The jukebox is still glowing, and that back corner is still waiting for midnight to strike. And that's when things changed for me, truly. I realized that the hardest part of growing older isn't the wrinkles or the tired joints. It's the memories we keep to ourselves, the ones that sit quietly across from us when the rest of the world is asleep. Thank you for sitting with me tonight, and for listening. It means a lot to share these things. If you enjoy immersive stories about hidden truths, human behavior, and unsettling memories, consider subscribing to Rosemary Whispers. We have many more memories to look back on together. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and watch the roads when the ice sets in.